Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Welcome. I'm so glad you can join us on Mission Evolution, where we bring the latest knowledge from today's leading experts to support your evolutionary process. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour, we'll discuss when spirit and medicine meet. If there's one professional that dances the gate between life and death, it's medical doctors. While, for the most part, doctors are taught and encouraged to pay attention to the physical only, what unexplained phenomenon have they observed in these extreme situations? What have they experienced that they keep to themselves to remain professional? How can these experiences evolve the way we view medicine and spirit? With us this hour to delve into this amazing topic is Dr. Scott KOLBABA, the author of Physicians' Untold Stories. Dr. KOLBABA is an internist in private practice in Wheaton, Illinois. He graduated from the University of Illinois College of Medicine with honors and did his residency at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago and at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He's been awarded memberships in the Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society and has been featured in Chicago Magazine as a top doctor in internal medicine. His website, physicianuntoldstories.com. Dr. KOLBABA, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thanks, Gwilda. It's great to see you.
Good to see you as well. So, as a doctor and an internist, what drew you to looking into the spiritual aspects or the more esoteric aspects of medicine and of life?
Well, I've been in practice for a long time, and it took me a long time to realize that there are other things related to medicine that you can't explain. And I think it started when one of my friends grabbed me on the floor, and he said, "Scott, I've got this incredible story I want to tell you." And I said, "Okay, go ahead and tell it to me." But he wouldn't right there because he was afraid other people would hear it. So we had to go into an empty patient room, and he started to relate this incredible story to me about he was doing surgery on one of my patients, and all of a sudden she arrested from probably the antibiotic that was given to her. And they took a while to get her going, but they finally were able to get her back. And when Dr. Mokel, that was the doctor telling me the story, when he was doing CPR on the patient, she finally came back, and the person doing CPR before him wasn't doing an adequate enough job, so he had to give the person a kind of a shove aside to get in there and really save her life. And so she survived. She went to the ICU afterwards. And then about 2 days later, when Dr. Mokel was ready to discharge her, he was talking about what happened. And she surprised him by saying, "I saw the whole thing happen. I saw the person that you pushed aside to do the CPR. I watched she described some very detailed things that no one could have told her, the color of a stethoscope and the dress one of the techs was wearing and things like that no one would have known." And she also said, when I was looking down at myself, my grandmother came to me, who's been dead for a number of years, and said, "That's not your time to come. I'm saving a place for you, but this is not your time. And so you'll have to go back." And she did. And by this point, Dr. Mokel kind of got weak knees and sat down and didn't quite know what to say. He's a pretty scientific kind of a guy and trying to figure out, how science can explain this. And he just couldn't. And so when he told me that story, I thought, I wonder if other doctors have had experiences like this that they just simply can't explain scientifically. So I started hanging out in the doctor's lounge and asking docs if they had any unusual stories. And I was really surprised because, doctors don't talk about this. They're pretty conservative. They don't want to be on the extreme edge of things. They don't want people thinking that they are seeing visions and ghosts and things like that. So it took a little bit to drag some of these stories out of doctors, but many doctors came to me and told me these incredible stories. And I thought, I better write these down because this is something that I've never heard before, because doctors don't talk about this. And that's how the book got started.
Dr. KOLBABA, did you find some things you had to reconcile between your medical training and what you were hearing and all the different stories? Did you have kind of a crisis of faith of sorts?
Well, this is something you don't learn in medical school. You don't learn about, dreams that foretelling the future events. You don't learn about, uh, you know, uh, apparitions that came to doctors that helped them save somebody's life. And so I had to really scratch my head and say, this is, it actually strengthened my faith that there's something else out there, that I don't care what you call it. Most of the doctors that I interviewed called it God, but there's something out there that looks out for us and in strange and wonderful ways may help us in ways that we don't even realize. And so I'm delighted that the doctors were able to recognize that too. And when they saw the number of doctors that were coming forth, I think they all got a little reassured that patients wouldn't shun their practice when they realized that they had a dream that saved somebody's life.
So, have you found since you wrote your book and during your interviews that these doctors have found a certain amount of relief in recognizing they aren't the only ones that have had these seemingly inexplicable experiences?
I think that's the case. And when we had a book launch and we had the book signing, many of the doctors showed up for that. And they were really delighted that so many people were congratulating them on coming forth with these stories. And what I found after I wrote the book, and some of these doctors have found that too, is that other people will come up to them, patients will say, I'm glad you wrote that story because I had an experience just like that, where I had something happen to me that just couldn't have been coincidental, that showed me that there was something else. And thank you for coming forth, because now I feel I can tell it too. If you can tell it, I can tell it without being embarrassed or shunned by other people, thinking I'm just a little little off the center aisle here.
Have you had any inexplicable esoteric experiences yourself, sir?
I have. I've had a couple, which also got me interested in writing this book. One, I have a bunch of kids. I'm not sure where they all came from. I've got 7 kids, and we love to take them on vacation every year. And one of the years we took them on vacation to Cape Cod, which is one of our favorite places. My wife grew up off the Cape, and we were having well, did you ever have a wonderful day, a day that you will remember forever? That was just the perfect day. The weather was great. Everyone's getting along. It was just a really feel good day. And on vacation, the boys tend to cook. So we decided to go to the store and we wanted to get some stuff that we normally don't eat. We got some swordfish fillets, which is absolutely excellent, some corn on the cob. And then on checking out, we looked at the pies. They had a whole stack of pies there. They were cherry pies. We talked about our favorite pies, and we decided that my mother's rhubarb pie was one of the best we've ever had, because she would take rhubarb from the backyard and cut it up and make a pie every fall. And it was a huge pie. And we'd sneak into the kitchen with spoons in a very unsanitary way. We'd devour the rhubarb pie, which was extra sweet because she loved to put extra sugar in there. And so we decided that, if my mother was alive, she had died before the vacation, unfortunately. And we decided that if she was here, she'd make us a rhubarb pie. And so that was our favorite pie. So we got back to the house. We made the swordfish steaks, and we had everything. It was just a wonderful meal. And then we got out the cherry pie. My wife cut the cherry pie up and served it to everyone. And when I took a bite of the piece of cherry pie on my plate, I got goosebumps. It wasn't cherry. It was rhubarb.
Now you're giving me goosebumps.
And that made me think, certainly that you can explain that by in the factory where they make the pies, they could have substituted rhubarb for cherry or whatever. But my explanation was, I think my mother was there with us, and she would have loved to be there with us and the family. She loved the family. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the experiences I had that I just couldn't explain. And that kind of got me, again, thinking about writing these stories down.
So how have these stories, in the process of writing them down and interviewing, how have they impacted your personal life and your professional life?
Well, I think when people do something that they really get into, that they really are excited about, and that they really want to do well, I think they get some help sometimes from up above. many times in my practice, you listen to that little voice in the back of your head that says, do this or don't do this. And we've had cases where we've had a person come in with certain symptoms, and on the back of my head, something will say, well, this person needs a stress test. You need to get a stress test. And I had one person that was going for I was pre-oping for surgery. And I just had that funny feeling that, he didn't have many risk factors, but I thought, well, we better get a stress test on this guy. And so we did.
Would you mind sharing with us what a stress test is, so we're with
Yeah,
you?
it's a stress test is where you run on a treadmill, and it looks at whether you have coronary disease or not. So it's an early way of diagnosing heart disease.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
And so I ordered the stress test, and sure enough, it was a disaster. He failed the stress test badly. He went in for a coronary angiogram to look at the arteries. He had major coronary disease. Had he gone for surgery, he probably would have had a serious problem, heart attack, or died even. And so if you have a couple of those experiences, and they happen more often than not. And I think doctors recognize that sometimes, that there's a little thing in the back of your head that you have to listen to. And I that could just be experience and coincidence, but I think some of that is really something that's guiding us and helping docs do the right thing for a patient. So I begin to listen. I'm listening to that more and more now.
How do you see the face of medicine changing if the ability and willingness and acceptance for listening to that was included in medical school?
It actually is a little bit more and more. They're including those kinds of things in medicine. They've done studies to find that people that are in the ICU, for example, and if there are a group of people that pray for this particular person, or a group of people that they seem to do better than the ones that aren't prayed for. So I think we're learning there is something else out there that may help us in medicine. And I think it's being incorporated a little bit more and more. It's just not hocus pocus anymore.
That's wonderful news. Because how many years has it been that never the two shall cross, that you're either spiritual or you're scientific?
Yeah, I think there's still a divide. I think some docs, still just are all scientific, but the docs that I talk to, especially the ones with the gray hairs that have been around for a while, have had some of these experiences, and they recognize that there's something else, and there's things that happen to them that you just can't explain. One of my orthopedic surgeons, for example, was a medical student at University of Iowa, wanted to stay there, didn't get into the residency program for some reason, and that was the greatest disappointment of his life. He had to go to University of Indiana, and he discovered that the University of Indiana had a program where they did microsurgery, where they could do with a microscope, connect little tiny blood vessels and little tiny veins and nerves and so forth. And he loved it, and that wasn't offered anywhere else. And when he finished, he finished with a degree in his residency in microsurgery. And he was one of the first to be able to reattach hands and when a hand's been cut off. And one of the first operations in the Chicagoland area happened when there was a kid that took a skill saw in a factory and ran it through his forearm inadvertently, obviously. And they called him up and said, "Can you do this? Can you save this kid?" And he said, "Send him over, put the hand on ice." And sure enough, after 17 hours, he reattached the hand. It was one of the first operations of the kind in the Chicagoland area, and saved the kid's hand. The kid had one objection after a couple of years of physical therapy and so forth, and he said, "Whenever I catch a football, my hand tends to tingle a little bit." And Dr. Showalter said, "Well, that's too bad."
At least you're catching a football, for crying out loud. Yeah. Yeah,
So he
just
realized
amazing.
the greatest thing, the greatest event in his life was being directed to this program, where he thought he wanted to get into one school and got into the other one. So he thinks that was some divine direction, and he's reattached many hands and done many phenomenal surgeries since that time.
Are you personally pretty comfortable with integrating spirit in medicine at this point?
I am, and I've written the book about it. So I recognize that there's lots of things that you just can't explain. And if you get a hunch or a premonition or something, you go with it. One of my good friends, Rich Jorgensen, is a surgeon, a general surgeon, and he had a dream that he dreamt that one of his good friends, Judge Glasso, was dead, and he saw him in the coffin, and it was just a very vivid dream. Usually when you wake up, you have a dream and you kind of forget about it, but this was such a vivid dream that he couldn't put it down. So he called the judge up and said, "Judge, I saw you dead in my dream." The judge kind of laughed and said, "Well, that's really funny, Rich. Come on, what's going on here?" So he said, "Please get a physical." So we went to get a physical. I saw an internist. The internist gave him a good bill of health. He said, "You're perfectly fine. Don't worry about it." And Rich, again, had that naggy feeling in the back of his head. This was such a vivid dream that he just couldn't put it away. And he called him up and said, "Well, would you see my cardiologist? Because I dreamt that you had a heart attack." So he said, "Yeah, I'll go see your cardiologist." And he did some testing, found out that he had end-stage coronary disease. He had what's called a widowmaker, which is a left main coronary blockage. And so they did an emergency bypass surgery on him and saved his life, because he would have not lived. The average life expectancy from a widowmaker is in terms of months and not years. So there are things that happen that you just can't explain, and I'm beginning to recognize that, and other doctors are too, I think.
So when you're getting this information, you're thinking about a client or you have a friend, and basically you're kind of in their electromagnetic field, if you will. Okay. Do you think that we're actually getting subliminal information by thinking about them and working with them?
Yeah, I think we are. I think when you're close to someone, when you love someone a great deal, I think you're more likely to get some information about that person. That happened to one of my other friends who actually didn't want to be named in the book, because he had a little stroke, and he was sitting at home. He had a stroke, and I think it made him a little confused. He didn't quite know what to do. This is an anesthesiologist. And so he knew what was going on, and he knew that he was having a stroke, but for some reason he didn't call for help. And, when you have a stroke, you lose brain cells by the billions every minute that you wait. And so all of a sudden he got a text from his sister. His sister had never texted him before. And so the sister said, "I'm concerned about you. Are you okay?" And he looked at the text and he thought, how would she know that I was having something like this happen to me? And so that prompted him to call the ambulance to get into the hospital, and they reversed his stroke, which you can do these days, and he came out perfectly fine. But had she not contacted him, I think he may have sat there for a long time, just kind of in a stunned state. But why would she contact him when she never did that before, never texted him right at that very minute? That's more than a coincidence, I think.
Exactly. It's just more than coincidence.
Yeah.
So if we're allowed to, we're about out of time in this segment, but if we're allowed to integrate medicine and spirit, do you think that how long do you think it's going to take to catch up with this? How long do you think it's going to take before people openly expect it and accept it?
It's going to take a while. I think it's slow, and I think things happen when other doctors talk to each other about what's going on. But the country is becoming more and more secular, and and religion and spirituality, as you probably know, are kind of being pushed aside. So it's going to be a battle, and I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because I wanted to show people there is something else out there, and that does have a place in real medicine.
A very important place from what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. So if you were to do one thing to get it out there more, are you going to write another book? What do you think you're going to do to push it?
I'm going to write more books. You're absolutely right.
All right. Well, we will pick up on your more books on the other side of a short pause here. We'll leave it as a cliffhanger.
Thanks.
Dr. KOLBABA and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. There'll be more fun stories to be had, so please stay with us. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. With us this hour discussing physicians' esoteric experiences is Dr. Scott KOLBABA. His website, physiciansuntoldstories.com. Dr. Scott, we were just about to get into what you're going to do personally to get this information out there more, to hopefully start blending spirit with medicine.
One of the nurses came up to me the other day and said, you promised to write a book about nurses. And so I said, okay, I will. And that's probably going to be my next book. We're doing a kid's book right now. Just kind of, I've always wanted to do a little kid's book about a little girl that's kind of awkward and uncomfortable and growing up and realizing she's pretty special. But the real book is going to be, I think, the nurse's book, but the nurse's unusual experiences. And some of those have been even more spectacular than the doctor's experiences, I think.
Well, given that they are really one-on-one with the patient more than the doctor is, that doesn't surprise me. So,
No, I agree. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah. I know that I have a nurse friend, and it's like some of the things she'll tell me are like, whoa, intense, and she's been in the practice for 25 years. There's a lot of spiritual stuff that came to her during that time, just watching what goes on with patients.
that's the
So,
nurses tell me. Yeah, absolutely.
so when you're in the process here of trying to bridge medicine and spirit, how do you approach a patient like your doctor friend? His friend was a judge and having heart problems that was undiagnosed. But if you just have a regular patient that isn't necessarily a friend, but you're getting intel that you can't really explain, how do you approach them with it?
Well, I had a patient like that was traveling, and he called me up and he said, I've got this right upper abdominal pain. That's where the gallbladder is, and that's a very typical thing to have when you're traveling because you're eating a little bit differently and maybe more fatty foods and so forth. So I said, get over, he was in Alabama, get over to the emergency room, have someone take a look at you and see how bad it is and see if they can and take care of it. So he did, and he called me up in the ER and said they checked me out. The gallbladder was fine. Everything was okay. And they said just contact me when he get home. So it sounded just like gallbladder, nausea, a little bit of food intolerance, and so forth. So he eventually came back a couple of days later to the office, and I saw him in the office, and it sounded just like a gallbladder attack that he had. So he was still having pain in the right upper abdomen. So I said, let's get some fancy gallbladder studies. We'll do some blood work and so forth. And it was all perfectly normal. And it's very frustrating when you have a person that you can't quite diagnose, and you think it's one thing, and you're sitting there and he's in pain. And so a day or so later, I woke up in the morning, and you know how you just have this, like my friend that thought the judge would have some serious heart disease. I just had a feeling that this guy had something else going on. And I said, well, I called him up about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I said, I've been thinking about you and been worried about you. I'd like you to get a lung scan. He laughed at me. He said, why a lung scan? This is abdominal pain. Isn't that a lung thing? And I said, well, yeah, but I just had this funny feeling that there might be something more going on with you. We can't diagnose the gallbladder because we did all these tests. Maybe there's something with your lung. And he said, well, I can't do it today because I'm flying out to Denver in the afternoon. And I said, well, what time are you flying out? And he said, about 2 o'clock. And so, well, I said, if I can get you in the morning, would you go for a lung scan? And he said, there's a long pause, and he finally said, okay, I'll go along with you. So my next call was the radiology department, and they had to twist their arms to get the lung scan in as an emergency. Usually that's, sometime later in the day, but they agreed to do it. And so about 2 hours later, after he'd been in the scanner, and the radiologist called me and said, that's a nice call. He had a nice big blood clot in his lung resting on his diaphragm. That's why it looked like his gallbladder, because it was so close to the abdomen. It's a nice call that you made, diagnosing a pulmonary embolus when it looked like it was abdominal symptom. How'd you do that? I said, I have no idea. I just woke up in the morning thinking that there's something more going on. Now, so the guy obviously went right into the hospital. He didn't fly out to Denver, where he could have lost his life traveling on an airplane, having another blood clot in his lung. So that was, really kind of a scary thing to think that we could have missed that, and he would have lost his life in Denver probably. So
he was receptive.
He was receptive. But you have to be careful. You get some little hunch that may or may not be the case, and you don't want to be flying off on a tangent and doing inappropriate tests. But there are some times when you just get that feeling that there's something else going on here that you really have to pursue. And if that hunch is strong enough, I think I like to listen to it, and I think many of the doctors do too, when they get that little feeling that there's something else going on.
You know, I've had over the years of my life a lot of police officer friends, and my dad was a cop, and my cousin was a cop, and they all spoke of a gut feeling. Okay, and that's okay, but intuition not right. But if they got a gut feeling, they can follow it, right? How does it register for you and for those you've talked to that have the same sort of thing? How do you feel it? How do you recognize it from just a passing fancy?
I think it's stronger than just a passing fancy. I think it's like this friend of mine who had that dream that was just such a real dream, and it was so strong that he just simply could not let it go. And sometimes I think you get those feelings that this is, you have a passing thought, maybe it could be this, maybe it could be that, but when you really get that gut feeling that I've there's really something serious going on here that I've got to attend to. I think that's when you really act on that. And one of my good friends, Steve Heim, is an orthopedic surgeon who had that same experience. He was skiing in Colorado, and they were skiing on a mountain that he'd never skied on before, and they had a blizzard that hit the mountain just as he and his wife and his wife's sister were ready to ski down, and they had to, they had to get down. So they were skiing in this blizzard. They could only see about 10 feet in front of them, and they came to a grove of trees, and they had to go to the right or the left. And Steve went to the right, and the girls, for some reason, went to the left. And they didn't see each other until Steve realized that they had separated. So he decided to ski back through the grove of trees. And as he was doing so, he had that gut feeling again that was, this is something really bad. There's something really serious going on here, and I've got to. It's a life and death situation. I've got to attend to this. I don't know what it is. So he stopped skiing. So here he is in the middle of a blizzard. The girls are waiting for him. He's in the grove of trees, and he stops skiing, takes his skis off, and then he starts to walk up the mountain. He had no idea why he was walking up the mountain. So he's walking up the mountain, he's climbing, walking, walking. And I came to a big tree the trees have this well, where the snow doesn't go into the base of the tree.
Right, that
And
can be very dangerous.
exactly. So he looks down at this well, and he knows why he came there. There is the shape of a skier that hit the tree, was unconscious, lying underneath the tree. He never would have been seen until the springtime had Steve not come across him. He brushed off the snow. He was still alive. He's also a trauma surgeon, so he's a perfect person to resuscitate him. And he called for the snow patrol, and the snow patrol came up, picked him up, and he literally saved his life just because he had that's very, very strong gut feeling that there was something he needed to do. And the guy lived and was perfectly fine after that. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, absolutely. How much of this Mayday do you think is passed from body to body? I mean, could it have been the gentleman's spirit? He's knocked out. He might have been out of body. Could it have been him that was sending the Mayday that the doctor was picking up?
I don't know. He doesn't know, but all he knows is there was something very strong that came to him that day that he had to do. And what's interesting also is that Steve told me afterwards, I said, well, how'd you feel, Steve? And he said, well, there were 2 lives that were saved that day. I said, what do you mean 2 lives were saved? He said, well, I saved the guy's life. And then my father died 2 years before that in a similar kind of an accident. He was cross-country skiing, and I was skiing with him. He arrested on the slope. I ran him down to the first aid station where we did CPR, and he died. And I've carried that burden ever since that time, thinking that I was responsible for his death. And after I saved this person's life that I told you about, he said, I realized that life and death is not up to me, that someone else is in charge of that, and that this saved my life. And the burden of the guilt that I experienced losing my father is now gone. I know that and I suspect he was probably part in on this whole thing to get me to save this other skier's life, so I could the guilt could be lifted off my shoulders.
Amazing. So we've talked a lot about what the doctors have experienced. Do you have any more that patients have experienced that the doctors have been unable to explain by medical means?
Absolutely. When I tell these stories to patients, they'll frequently say, well, I had something happen to me like that. Let me tell you the story. So I'm, more than, I'm usually a little late in my office rounds and office hours, but it's fun to listen to those stories. We had one fellow whose daughter was trying to get into a internship in New York City, and he wasn't very well off. And the rentals and for a 3-month stay in New York is very, very expensive. and so he didn't know how he was going to do it, and he had no idea what to do, and he was going to have to cancel the internship because she couldn't afford to stay in New York. So that night he had a dream about a person he hadn't seen for about 20 years. And it was kind of a strange dream. And the next morning, guess who called? The person that he hadn't seen for 20 years, who had done really well for himself, made a lot of money, had a big apartment in New York City with 3 bedrooms. And he said, I'm just calling to check in, see how you're doing. And he said, isn't that interesting? You're living in New York. And he said, yes, well, my daughter's looking for an internship, place to stay. He said, well, she can stay with me. I've got plenty of room here. So it worked out. She went to New York, stayed with the fellow that he hadn't seen for 20 years, and completed her internship. Didn't cost him a thing. And what's the likelihood that would happen as a coincidence? So I think those kinds of things, they're not all life-threatening. Obviously, this one wasn't a life-threatening condition, but I think things like that happen all the time that people don't even recognize.
It would have been a life-changing if she wasn't able to do her internship, for sure.
It would have been.
Yeah. And so Spirit probably has something pretty interesting planned for that little gal.
I think so.
So what do you think? Do you think that this is a skill? I mean, right now we're just kind of doing it by gosh and by golly.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that this is a skill that can be honed and refined? And if so, does everybody have the capacity, or is it like playing basketball? I don't play basketball. Too short. Wrong gender.
Yeah, my sense is that everyone has a little bit of this skill that they can pick up if they really listen for it. And I think we get so busy in our lives that we don't meditate, and we don't think about some of the finer, the higher things in life, and we get too busy with our daily lives. So I think everyone is subject to get these kinds of messages from above. I think, though, some people have refined it a little bit better, and they listen for this, and they know how to listen for it. So I think there's a little bit of both. I think everyone's subject to it, but I think there are some people that really listen for these kinds of messages, and they get them. And I think the miracles happen almost every day.
I'm with you. Do you feel that there is training? So say, for instance, there's a lot of old modalities out there that could possibly be useful in our modern medicine. I'm a shamanic teacher and practitioner, but I'm also a preceptor for the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And they have me teach medical doctors about the interface between shamanism and medicine. And when to refer and all that fun stuff. So there is movement in that direction. Do you think there's other old forms that used to deal in refining and honing our ability to read on the esoteric level that we could use?
I'm sure there are. I haven't looked into it personally, but I'm sure there are ways of teaching people how to listen for those kind of messages that would help all of us. So you probably would know better than I would teaching that at the medical school, but yeah, I'm sure there are methods and training that can be gotten to learn to listen.
What's wonderful is the acceptance that is starting to show up.
Are you noticing that in medical schools, that people are more open to this?
Yes, the young docs really are. Some aren't. Some of them look at me like, this woman really needs to get on some meds.
I'm sure that's the case.
Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of them that are they're very gifted. They've had experiences themselves, and they want to figure this out. And don't you think medicine will be greatly enhanced if they do?
For sure. I think, I think anytime we take on a worthwhile cause, I think there's some help that comes that we just can't quite explain. And so I think that would be a great thing. And congratulations for doing that kind of work at the university.
It's a real pleasure. And it gives me hope seeing these wonderful people that are going into medicine. Just gives me hope. So I understand that, speaking of daughters, that you had an experience with your own daughter. We have a little
my
time.
Daughter
Would you
Lucci,
share that with us?
Yes, my daughter Lucci is she likes to dance and sing. So she was in show choir, and they dance and sing at the same time, and they jump around on bleachers, which is with high heels on. So it's a little dangerous. There have been no major accidents there that I know of. But Lucci had a major competition in Onalaska, Wisconsin, and we live near Chicago. So the bus took off to go to Onalaska one afternoon, and we followed the bus about an hour later. And then the next thing I know, a couple hours into the trip, we got a call from Lucci and said, "Well, Dad, there was a little bit of a fire, but we're okay, and we're just waiting for another bus." And so we didn't think too much about it. But she sounded a little strange. And about an hour later, when we would have caught up with the bus, there were all these police cars and fire engines and smoke and all kinds of stuff on the side of the road. And we looked over and there was this bus that was burning up on the side of the road with all these black flames coming out of it. And all of a sudden, my wife said, "That's Lucci's bus." So we tried to get off the expressway. We couldn't because the police wouldn't let us. But evidently what happened is the bus the back tire was a flat. And then some of the rubber peeled off, and the friction from the rubber caught the wheel well on fire. And then that spread to the rest of the bus. And evidently, there are two buses on this trip. And the one bus behind, all the kids started texting the girls and the boys in the one bus in the front, saying, "Your bus is on fire, your bus is on fire." And sure enough, the bus pulled off, and the flames started to come up the side of the bus, and then they went underneath the bus. It was very quick. And my daughter was one of the last ones in the bus, and the flames got higher and higher. The smoke filled the whole bus. And then they said there was something really unusual that happened. And the people watching from the bus behind said it's like a giant hand going over the bus. The flames died down, smoke died down, and every girl was able to jump off the bus without being harmed. And when the last girl jumped off the bus, the flames roared through the bus, destroying everything inside the bus. And it was just a huge fire.
Amazing.
And so that was just such an amazing thing.
Just an amazing thing.
Yeah.
So this is about the time of the show when I have to ask you, Dr. KOLBABA, what is your mission?
You know, if I can do some good in the world and not too much harm, that's my goal, to just do some good in the world. And I think many docs are the same way. Most docs are kind of sappy, like what I call sappy do-gooders, and they're trying to do something that helps other people.
Well, it seems to me like bringing this information forward is a very powerful thing to be doing at this time. I think there's openness for it where, 15, 20 years ago, maybe not so much.
I think you're right. I think there's openness for it, and when I read the reviews on the books, people say, this has helped me a lot. I realize that there's something else now, and it's changed my life. So that's great satisfaction for me to read those kinds of reviews.
And do you get them from the docs as well, ones that weren't involved in the study?
Yeah, the docs were surprisingly interested in all this, and many of them read the book and like it, and a lot of the nurses have read the book too. So it's fun to see that happen.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, I'm really excited to see your book on nurses. I'm sure I have quite a few friends that will be anxious to see that too, because there's a lot of fun stuff going on out there that's not explicable.
I agree, totally. I agree.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. KOLBABA, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thanks, Gwilda. It was a real pleasure.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Scott KOLBABA, the author of Physicians' Untold Stories, an internist in private practice in Wheaton, Illinois. His website, physiciansuntoldstories.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. Please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.